This is a reading from Luke chapter 14, verse 15. A man sitting at the table with Jesus exclaimed, "What a privilege it would be to have a share in the kingdom of God." Jesus replied with this illustration. A man prepared a great feast and sent out many invitations. When all was ready, he sent his servant around to notify the guests that it was time for them to come. But they all began making excuses. One said he had just bought a field and wanted to inspect it, so he asked to be excused. Another said he had just bought 5 pair of oxen and wanted to try them out. Another had just been married, so he said he couldn't come. The servant returned and told his master what they had said, and his master was angry and said, "Go quickly into the streets and alleys of the city and invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind." After the servant had done this, he reported, "There is still room for more." So his master said, "Go out into the country lanes and behind the hedges and urge anyone you find to come, so that the house will be full. For none of those I invited first will get even the smallest taste of what I had prepared for them." Many times you'll notice Jesus referring to his kingdom as a feast or a banquet. And it's only appropriate because a feast and a banquet is a pretty joyous occasion. Now, as Christians have been known to be a pretty solemn people. In fact, there was a man named Julian who said that the sun rose every morning, but most Christians fail to see it. And another guy named Ruskin, whom I'm sure you heard of, was raised in a very strict home where he was given a pogo stick, if it's what we called it, and the aunt, the very serious-minded Christian aunt, took it away from him and said Christians shouldn't have toys. And later, a man named A.B. Bruce was told that he could not sing and run and play, not at any age, for Christians were a serious people. Now, if this is truly a feast that we're being invited to, a banquet that we're being invited to, and if we are indeed a saved people, then we need to be joyful. So being a Christian celebrates life itself. It celebrates salvation. It celebrates love. It celebrates forgiveness. The Jews of Jesus' day expected God to break into history, and the golden days of their age were to change, and they were going to become a triumphant, powerful people. They had this picture, this messianic banquet that they all understood and knew about and talked about. And that story was the story of a great monster called Leviathan, who was going to be chopped up, cooked, and fed to the people. And they were going to celebrate in a great feast. So the story of the banquet and the feast of celebration over this messianic moment was very familiar to the man who sat at the table with Jesus and said these words, "What a privilege it would be to have a share in the kingdom of God." And this man like you and I, probably a Jew, in fact, I think it's probably 99% chances he was, among all the others, was listening when Jesus looked at him and told the story. The story that we've all heard so many times, the little parable where the servants are sent out. We sang the song about it. We've read about it. The invitations go out. The people get the invitations and say, yeah, okay, it's a feast. I'll be there. They can't wait. They're going to celebrate. It's going to be fun. And then they don't announce the time. They wait until the day of the feast, and the servants are sent out again to tell the people, now's the time. Now's the moment. Come. The feast is ready. And what happens? Well, the landowner says, I'm sorry, I've got land here. I've just bought it. I've got business to tend to. And so he's not so interested in being there, is he? Because he's so busy. He's so important. And then the man with the 5 pair of oxen, 5 pair now, 5 pair, not 5 pair. That's a lot of oxen. That cost a lot of money. And he couldn't wait to get out and test them out. It's kind of like the guy that bought the new car, and it's Sunday morning, and it's sitting in his garage. And he says, honey, let's just go for a quick drive. We'll run up to Sedona and back. We got to try this new baby out. All those horses in there. And so he does. He takes his car and he leaves and he goes, and guess what he misses? He misses what God is doing that day. Now, the man that gets married is a little more difficult to explain. He said he couldn't come because he's married. Well, back in that day, marriages were often arranged, and he didn't even know the girl that he was marrying, nor she him. And so they were given 1 year with no military service and no work to get to know one another. And it's amazing. It's quite a story. And so he could say, I have to be excused because I have this new wife that I need to get to know. Now, with no waiting and no hesitation, the feast was ready. The servants had been sent out. So the master said, go into the streets, go into the alleys, and invite who? How would you limit God's generosity? How would you decide who to invite? Who would you invite? So, who did God invite first? Let's read Luke 14:12 through 14 right quick. When you put on a luncheon or a dinner, don't invite your friends, your brothers, relatives, and rich neighbors, for they will pay you back by inviting you. Instead, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind. Then, at the resurrection of the godly, God will reward you for inviting those who could not repay you. So what are all these people that rejected the invitation at the last moment, just when the time was here and ready and the feast was set? At that moment, they turned the host down. And the master was rejected. He was angry, and I don't blame him, do you? After going to that much trouble, and you had accepted the invitation, and now they rejected the invitation. I don't blame him. I'd be angry too. So who did God invite? He invited the poor. See, I thought you were going to say he invited me. I mean, he did invite you, but did he invite you first? He invited the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the lame, and filled many seats with those. Now, every time I read this, I always wonder, all those normal people out there that he didn't invite, what were they doing? Hiding behind the hedges and in the byways, doing their thing. But God's grace is sufficient. And so when the room was not filled and every chair was not occupied, this master sent the servants back out again into the byways, into the highways, way off into the places, and he said, bring back anyone, fill this place. Fill it up. Surely, the servants thought to themselves, I suspect, not the Gentiles. Oh, yes. Even the Gentiles. The house, the kingdom must be filled. Those that rejected God were passed over. And God said, I will fill my kingdom. And so he did. I don't know about you, but every time I read those words, none of those I invited first will get even the smallest taste of what I had prepared for them. Every time I read that. I'm kind of sick at heart. How could anyone, reject an invitation to that feast? But they do. They do. Now, the cost of saying yes to God is very real. And in the very next passage, right after this little parable, he tells a little story that kind of helps us to understand it. But before I read that, let me just simply say this. How many times a day I say to myself, God, be in control of my life. Let me get out of the way. And then I take it back and go screw it up. You see, God is not controlling our lives like the master of slaves. He is not holding us to bondage. God controls us with love. It says plain as day in 4 little words in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 14. Christ's love controls us. And so I am under the control then of God's love, which changes me, releases me, gives me freedom. And I want more than anything now, as you do, to be a people of the feast, a saved people, a people who are there ready to celebrate that salvation. For this is coming to be the time when we can say, Jesus Christ is risen. He is risen indeed. So the cost of saying yes is rarely expected. In the very next parable, the very next comment that Jesus makes, because he was walking down the road to Jerusalem, going to the cross, and he stopped and turned around to the crowds that were following him. They thought he was going to build an empire, a kingdom, a physical kingdom on this earth. He knew he was on his way to the cross. But he stopped and turned around and he said these words to them. If you want to be my follower, you must love me more than your own father and mother, wife, husband and children, brothers and sisters, yes, more than your own life. Otherwise, you can't be my disciple. And you cannot be my disciple if you don't carry your own cross and come follow me. So, the cost of saying yes to God is rarely expected Because most of the things that we expect in life are really sort of twists on what God is doing. We see things differently, very human eyes. But God sees them in ways directed only by his loving nature. Are we willing to take up our cross and follow him? Since life is not what we expect, and love is not always the easiest of choices, I would ask these words. If Jesus had called you to the supper tonight, and this great feast was laid out for you, I would ask you for a moment to close your eyes and think of this. Sitting at the table, at the head of the table, is the Master. And across from you, directly across, is a man blind, and next to him, a crippled man. And on the other side, a man dressed in rags. What will you say to them?